Hey friends, Lucian here with the Bullish Bears team. Wanted to make this video on the head and shoulders candlestick pattern. Shoulders patterns. So head and shoulders pattern. The head and shoulders pattern is a prevailing pattern among short sellers, investors who profit from downtrends. After 3 peaks, the stock plummets, offering a textbook high return opportunity to traders who catch the trend early. So as you can see, this is pretty much like a kind of a textbook, perfect looking head and shoulders. You have a head up here, left shoulder, right shoulder. So picture with the head and shoulders your body, right? Or any person's body. Picture you have a head, you have a left shoulder, and you have a right shoulder. Now, typically, again, this is not 100% all of the time, the left shoulder is usually higher than the right shoulder. Many times the left shoulder and the right shoulder will be even. And then you'll also see in stock charts sometimes where they'll be almost identical. And then you might see a left shoulder, one candlestick pop up with a wick above the left shoulder. So when we tell people don't get stuck in the minutia of it, that doesn't mean that that's not a head and shoulders pattern. So if you see that and you see a candlestick that jumps up above the right shoulder, but the whole pattern still looks like a head and shoulders, don't negate the pattern. Find the support in the neckline. That's what's most important, right? So again, I'm going to show you several different real world examples of the head and shoulders pattern and what they look like, again, in the real world. It's also important to realize that the neckline is not going to always be perfect. It's not going to always be completely flat like this. Sometimes it'll be diagonal as well. That's where it's important to learn how to draw trend lines. So let's take a look at ASNA, right? You can see here really nice head looking up pattern right up here. So you can see the head, left shoulder area. You can kind of see it's all like right in here. You can see this peaks right up in here. And then you can see a real short looking kind of pop, right, to form that right shoulder. So you can see this right shoulder is lower than this left shoulder, and then you have the head up here. And then if you take your trend line, this is where, trend lines, you can kind of, you can make it kind of, you got to eyeball it, right? And as the pattern goes, you can do a trend line right there, and then you could also do it over here. So you could have done it right over here, saw that this would have been like the neckline break, or you could do, you could have done it like out this way as well as it starts to progress. And then many people do it across too. So, this is where, gauging and getting used to trend lines and how to draw them becomes kind of like an art. You can do it again like this as well, depending where the pattern was. You could have looked over here. You would have missed some of it over here. You could have made it move up a little bit higher. Still would have kind of missed it. You still, again, you wouldn't have necessarily got that drop down. That's where, again, adjusting your trend lines is important. You can see right here, this would have given you a good kind of gauge or an eyeball when it starts to break over here. Now you can see it see how it just popped up just a little bit before it failed. Again, it's all about support and resistance, finding these patterns, drawing your trend lines, super important. You can see over to the right as well, there's another head and shoulders pattern. You can see a head up here, followed by a left shoulder, kind of like this with a pop up here, and then a right shoulder over here. You can kind of like gauge, you could do it like this, right? You could do a kind of a flat, well, my line is not working great, kind of flat, there we go, kind of like a flat pattern, so it's more of a flatter kind of neckline, and then it broke down. As you can see, price went back up to retest it. You could also have drawn it like kind of diagonally up this way to catch it a little bit sooner. You're always going to be adjusting trend lines, very important to always be able to find these angular momentum, angular trend lines, horizontal trend lines. Super important when trading is being able to draw support and resistance lines. But as you can see here, 2 head and shoulders patterns, right? Really nice looking patterns. And it's being able to find that neckline, and the shorts can typically come in and watch for it to break down for potential shorts. A lot of people will also try to, short things earlier. Some people try to short on the right shoulder. It can be tricky at times doing that because, sometimes you'll get, again, these peaks that kind of pop up, right? And they can kind of trick you or fake you out. But traditionally, shorts kind of come in when the neckline starts to break to short it down. And then as you can see, you know, that when the neckline breaks, you know, price will eventually go back up to retest it. Now, it didn't, this is a really crazy volatile looking stock over here. You know, this one didn't go back to retest it until like way over here, right? But you can see over here, once the neckline broke, price went and attempted to break above it again. It did just a tiny bit before it failed, right? So again, when you're shorting it, you know, traditionally shorting it below the neckline and then wanting that neckline to hold. Otherwise, you know, if you're short or you're bullish, you know, or if you're short, taking a short position or a put position on it with options, you typically will obviously want the price to continue to fall, not reverse on you and go back up. So let's look at several more examples here. BK. You can see if I zoom in over here, you will see really nice looking head and shoulders. You have a head area right up here, followed by a left shoulder. And you can see that right shoulder is actually right over here, just a tiny bit less than this, but very kind of even over here. So you can kind of draw your trend line up like this if you wanted, you know, so you can kind of get this pullback down here, another one down over here. So if you want to try, obviously try to get it earlier, sometimes you're going to miss it, right? Sometimes you're going to miss that move. Sometimes you have to anticipate it. That's where, you know, again, sometimes if you wait for it to just completely drop on the neckline, you might miss it because you'll see like a gap down like this. So that's where, again, some people might attempt to like, you know, draw that. Let me do this. Draw this trend line across over here and say, you know, okay, this stock right up over here is right at the peak over here. It's not breaking. They might look at an intraday pattern to see if there's a setup to take it short, because obviously if you can catch it up here, obviously you're going to make a lot of this move down. But the risk is if price reverses and goes back above, then you know, it's then breaking the head and shoulders pattern. So it's, again, all a matter of your risk tolerance. But, you know, sometimes you're going to miss it and it'll gap down like this. And sometimes you'll get the ability, you know, ahead of time, like you might get a candlestick that allows you to get an entry. But you can see this right shoulder is a resistance area. So if you're shorting it down, if it breaks above, that's where you'd want to cover your position or close out your put. But it's typically getting in at the break of that neckline area, right? Let's go and take a look at BCRX. And actually, I've typed in the wrong one. What the heck? BCRX. All right, here we go over here. And you can see over here, a head right up here, a left shoulder right here, and then a right shoulder over here, and then you'll see a breakdown, right? So you can now, again, in anticipation, you can kind of draw your trend lines. You know, this is sometimes you're going to gauge, you're going to miss it. Sometimes, a lot of times, it gets kind of sloppy. Now, in here, it might have given you several warning signs, like, okay, this is a good chance. That's where you're going to have to zoom in and see these other candlesticks. Make sure you watch our other videos, because there's going to be warning signs within these other candlesticks that are showing you, hey, we're not going to go and break this potential, this left shoulder up here, so this might be a short ability to take a short. You can kind of take it down over here as well with the trend line, so you can kind of have a couple here and show you, okay, this is really giving you some warning signs that this is going to fail, and caught it before it dropped down over here. Now, again, many times patterns break. You know, patterns are not perfect, so sometimes you might, you know, get in on something and it might fake you out. Like right over in here, you could have maybe taken a short, and then this candle could have faked you out thinking that it's going to go back up. And look, it was a fake out candle, you know, a long-legged doji candle to fake you out. So it's just, that's where it's just determining your support and resistance, and actually, you know, determining your risk management and looking at support and resistance. Sometimes you can gauge it really well, and sometimes you got to eyeball it, but that's where risk comes in. And trading is about risk, but it's also, most importantly, about managing your risk, right? Let's take a look at AKRX. And you can see over here, really nice looking head and shoulders, really clearly defined head right up here, left shoulder over here, right shoulder over here, and then you got your neckline. This one kind of has a flat neckline over here, and there you go. It failed, And then you can see retest it up right here, and then boom, failed, right? So that's what's going to happen. Many times you get the retest, and many times it just fails, right? Very important to watch, very important to see. You can see over here, there's a head over here, a left shoulder over here, a right shoulder as well, another head and shoulders pattern. You'll see head and shoulders so many places, especially if you're day trading. They happen over and over and over again all the time. This is one of the most common patterns to be aware of. Right here, this is the S&P, SPX, head, left shoulder, right shoulder, right? You could have done, if you're doing your trend line, you could have had a trend line up here and be like, uh-oh, that's not good. This is another pattern too. I got to be absolutely aware of this, the bearish harami. That's a very, very huge warning sign right there that things are going down. But if you missed it, you could have kind of, you could have just even seen over here, right? See this line across here? You have three kind of spinning top candles that are like, they're forming that shoulder, like saying warning, 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 right at the 9 EMA. And then boom, look at, see that neckline right here? That thing just broke. And a lot of people were wondering, what the heck happened? I didn't see that coming. Well, this gave you a very, just clearly, you can't have any more perfect head, left shoulder, right shoulder, neckline, break, right? Head and shoulders pattern, very, very, very popular. Got to be able to identify them. Now, head and shoulders patterns are also known as FU patterns many of times. You can basically put your knuckles, let me go back to SPX. You can kind of picture putting almost your middle finger up to the screen right underneath here, and then your knuckles underneath here. So you'll hear many times that the head and shoulders pattern is also known as the FU pattern, right? Clearly defined, put your middle finger here. Not saying to do it, but you know what I'm saying. Like, just picture this. Picture someone giving you a middle finger, and that's what it's saying, Screw you, we're heading downwards. And that's what happens many of times. So important to be aware of. Let's take a look at GBTC. This is a very huge one right here. So let me just clear this. This is actually really known as a really clearly defined FU pattern. Big middle finger here, put your knuckles underneath here. And you can see here, a head up here, a left shoulder over here, right shoulder formation right here. You can see that here it's less than this long-legged doji, and then this thing just crashed. Sometimes it's tough to get a neckline on something like this. The FU pattern happens so quickly that that's where trend lines kind of come in, where you might just kind of draw like a trend line, and then when you start to see it break over that, ideally you want to get in. This, you can see this is like a high wave candle up here. That's just telling you this thing is pretty much screwed. And then you can see over here you have this clearly defined left shoulder or right shoulder. You can see it's lower than this one, but then this could also be a left shoulder as well. So people could get faked out and be like, well, it might not get above this one. They're kind of worried over here, but you can see it couldn't break above this top area here, and then it just failed, right? Let's take a look at X. X right here is a head and shoulders. You can see a head, left shoulder over here, right shoulder is lower. You can kind of just draw your trend line like that. Sometimes you could do it depending on what was going on. You could have drawn it up over here. Depending, again, on your entries, things are always forming, but you can see this right shoulder is formed over here, left shoulder, and then it broke down, right? You can see that these start to get to be more like FU patterns, right? Again, it's still a left shoulder up here, a head, like a right shoulder down in this area. And you can see the line here breaks down at the neckline. So it's a head and shoulders. Again, this is more like big middle finger right there. So again, head and shoulders, FU pattern. You'll see a lot of these FU patterns on the pot stocks that they just go like, big middle finger here, kind of a left shoulder. You can see a right shoulder with a quick pop, this quick pop up here, but you can still see it clearly broke down, right? Middle finger, head and shoulders, FU pattern. And then over here you can see a head over here, a left shoulder over here, a right shoulder. You can kind of just, just even draw these trend lines like this, right? Kind of just goes across. You can kind of catch it up even over here. So kind of just learning draw these trend lines, and get an idea of when something's going to break down. Sometimes you get a warning sign, and sometimes it just drops, right? You got to just constantly, it's all about finding support and resistance and looking at these charts and being aware of the story that's trying to be told. Again, you're going to see lots of head and shoulders patterns on pot stocks, and especially on a lot of those small cap companies. Anything like under $10, or especially under like $5 or so, you'll see head and shoulders patterns like almost on all the daily charts. They're like everywhere. They're just because, again, these small cap companies they're pump and dumps, right? So they're day traders coming in, pumping them up for a couple days, and then they just drop, like big FU patterns, big head and shoulders patterns. Again, you can see a head, kind of a left shoulder up here, peak, right shoulder over here, and then the stock just kind of like just draw your trend line kind of across here, kind of breaks down, or you can kind of catch it depending on where it was, like up here, just drawing these lines and be aware of when it breaks down. Let's take a look at CRNT. I'm showing you several examples because this is a very common pattern. I really want you to be able to just identify this and see them on charts. You can see a head, left shoulder, right shoulder. Then the stock, here you go, kind of just goes and just draw your trend line, kind of goes and just breaks right down, right? Head and shoulders pattern, so important, and you'll see them again, day trading on all the intraday charts, on these small cap companies all over the place. You'll see them everywhere. Right here, you can see another one right here. Head, left shoulder, right shoulder, break down. Head, left shoulder, right shoulder, break down, right? You can see kind of one over here. Head, left shoulder, right shoulder, broke down. Over and over. Here we go. Head, left shoulder, right shoulder, broke down. Over and over and over, you'll see the head and shoulders pattern.